further ado, I'd like to welcome Yasmine Mohammed.
I really want to sincerely thank each and every one of you for coming out tonight in the rain. I really appreciate it. I want to thank Angelo and the Free Speech Club for inviting me here tonight. This is a really big deal for me because UBC is where my life changed. So everything is coming full circle for me tonight, and I'm really glad that you're all here to share in this with me. So, about 20 years ago, when my daughter was just 2 years old, I found out that her father would be in an Egyptian prison serving 15 years hard labor for being a terrorist and a member of Al-Qaeda. And upon hearing that information and seeing a picture of him behind bars, I decided that it was my opportunity to start my life in a new direction. And the first thing I did was apply to UBC. I sat down with my papers, because these are the days before the internet. So I sat down with pen and my whiteout and my stack of papers that I hoped would change my life. And as I filled them out, I had no idea what I was doing. Back in those days, I still wore niqab, so that means I used to cover my face in black. My whole body, in fact, wore gloves, black socks. And so I was very nervous about how I was going to go to UBC looking like that. And so, you know, having just come out of an incredibly difficult, abusive relationship, I had exactly zero self-confidence. So I was really nervous, and I was really scared about what would happen if UBC accepted me, or even worse, if they didn't accept me. But luckily they did. And that's when my metamorphosis began. At UBC, I took psych courses that taught me about myself and the dangerous dynamics I was stuck in with my family. I also took child psychology courses, which taught me how to be a better mother, a mother that would be nothing like the woman who raised me. And most significant of all, I took a history of religions course that allowed me to critically examine the religion I was born into in a way that I was never allowed to before. I was allowed to question, to think, to doubt, and once that door was opened, everything changed. As they say, a mind that has been opened cannot be closed again. September 11th, 2001 also happened during my time at UBC. That was another influential factor in my enlightenment. All those stories and threats were no longer theoretical. It was now real life. This was the result of following the scriptures of Islam. I felt the weight of that realization. I had to look it in the face. This is what happens. This is what Islam calls for. How could I continue to call myself a Muslim? How could I identify with the same ideology as those men, as those murderers? I stayed at UBC until I had earned 3 degrees. And when I walked out of the doors of this university, I had categorically transformed entirely into a different person from the one who walked in the doors so many years prior. I had everything I needed to step out into the world and start my life by my own terms, a journey that brings me here with you today. My papers got mixed up. So when I started writing, when I started speaking out, okay, now I'm going to have to find my actual paper. Okay. Although it has been about 15 years since I last identified as a Muslim, I didn't start speaking out right away. For a multitude of reasons, I kept very quiet for very long. But eventually, that infamous Bill Maher episode with Sam Harris and Ben Affleck inspired me to tell my story. I just had to tell my perspective. I needed people to know that I exist, that we exist, that our stories, our lives exist. I was tired of the polarized conversations that were getting us nowhere because both sides were too invested in their own narratives to bother trying to understand that they were both wrong. Islam is not a religion of peace, and all Muslims are not terrorists. Both statements are infantile. I just needed to tell it for me. I needed to get it out. And I didn't know if anyone would care to listen to me speak, but I just had to speak anyway. There was, of course, the predictable hate messages and death threats, but more overwhelmingly was love from people like you. To have people not only listen to me, but to support me, to empathize with me, and to care about me, that's more than I could have ever imagined. And of course, once I did decide to speak, I constantly got the question, why are you doing this? Why are you risking your life? Why are you sticking your neck out? What are you hoping to accomplish? Perplexingly, so many people accuse me of wanting to eradicate Islam. A person who used to be a heroin addict doesn't speak out about their journey because they think it might eradicate heroin. Of course not. They know that heroin will continue to poison people, and they know that many people will choose to poison themselves. The aim is not to eradicate it. My aims are threefold. Number one, as a college professor for the past 15 years, my aim is to educate. For all the people running around saying heroin is a drug of peace, my aim is to educate you on the dangers of this drug. Number two, for those who look down on or who are disgusted by heroin users, assuming they are society's filth, I'm here to say you're not being fair. The users are not your enemies, the drug is. These people's minds and bodies are being controlled just like mine was. When I look at Muslims so indoctrinated in this religion that teaches them not to value their own lives, it breaks my heart. I know how it feels to be under the influence of such dangerous indoctrination. And third, I speak out for you. I speak out for my fellow free thinkers. I speak out for all the closeted ex-Muslims who are afraid to speak up for themselves. I'm here to say, you can do it. The journey will not be easy, but it will be worth it. If I could attain my freedom with an Al-Qaeda member lurking in my past, a toddler on my hip, and only a high school education, you can be free too. My path to going public began with a blog on Tumblr. The posts on that blog evolved into the book that I'm launching today. This day is not only special because of the fact that everything in my life has come full circle with speaking at UBC, but it's also special because things have finally come full circle with this book. This book is the most difficult thing I have ever done in the past decade. I have to ask that you all give a huge round of applause to my husband, who supported me throughout this entire process. Thank you so much. I don't want to point him out because I need him alive for our children. After writing a chapter, I would be nearly catatonic. I would just sit and stare at the wall. I was overcome with so many memories that had been locked away in dark corners of my mind for years, and I unlocked them all, chapter by chapter, and it was excruciating. I started writing as fast as I could just to get it over with, just to get the story out. It can be best described as vomiting. I wanted to expel it all out so the pain could be over. I wanted this book out of me and onto the pages so that I could finally relax, having released all those toxins from within me. And when I finally finished writing the book, So began the long journey of finding a literary agent. After 2 years of rejection letters, I finally found one. But not just anyone. My agent was from one of the most prestigious agencies in the United Kingdom, the oldest talent and literary agency in the country. In fact, this agency had clients such as Sir Michael Caine, Twiggy, and the creator of Downton Abbey. Unfortunately, even an agent from an agency of that stature could only provide me with reams and reams of more rejection letters. So even though I had the support of people that I admired immensely, I could not get this book published. Both Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Sam Harris got me in touch with their literary agents, and both paths led to dead ends. I had a text message from Ayaan that I would look at and cry. In the message, she was telling me how proud she is of me. I was embarrassed, sad, frustrated, and just entirely depleted. I eventually gave up. I was ready to throw in the towel on this whole affair. All I ever got was hate from white saviors and Muslims, and it just wasn't worth the heartache anymore. I was proud of what I had accomplished with my organization, Free Hearts, Free Minds, however, and so I decided I would just continue to do that. In the short time that we have been running, Free Hearts, Free Minds has managed to support one person every 6 weeks. We have never faltered. That endeavor was going smoothly. We're making a real difference to individuals who are stuck in Muslim-majority countries that would execute them for the crime of leaving Islam. Women and members of the LGBT community were of the highest risk, so they were of the highest priority to us. I was despondent about my book, but I was proud of my organization. I sent out a tweet telling the world that I was done with this book and that I officially give up. A few minutes later, I got a text from Sam asking if I was free to talk. I told him that as much as I enjoyed speaking with him, the last thing in the world I felt like doing was talking about this book. I was over it, but we still talked anyway. When he called, Sam gently and carefully encouraged me to tell him all about it. And by the end of our long conversation, he had me convinced that I should self-publish. To be honest, I was not convinced entirely, but I was convinced enough to dispassionately start going through the motions. My husband played another heroic role here as he dealt with the onslaughts of emails asking millions of questions, partially because I'm sure he knew that I was this close to pulling the plug again. But Sam's help didn't end there. I must have texted him dozens and dozens of title ideas and a few other dozen subtitles. He sent me feedback on everything. We texted back and forth until we finally came up with a title and a subtitle. Now that we had a title, we needed a cover, and so began the flurry of texts again, back and forth until we finally had a cover. And not for 1 second in any of those exchanges did I lose sight of the fact that this man, who I've said many times, if I were to follow a prophet, I would follow Sam Harris. Never did I lose sight of the fact that he believed in me and that he was supporting me. And I was absolutely over the moon grateful for every second of his time. His faith in me melted away all my doubts, and before I knew it, I found myself actually wanting to publish the book again. I'm still terrified, not gonna lie. There is something liberating about splaying your whole life for all to see. It's true, but mostly it's really terrifying. But if writing this book can do for others what Tiffany has done for me, then it will all be worth it. If you don't know who Tiffany is, you're gonna have to read the book. But essentially, Tiffany is the one that lifted the veil from my eyes. She's the one that pointed out the door to freedom. She's the one who let me know that I was smarter than to believe such lies that were not only dangerous to the planet, but that were dangerous to me and my psyche. She let me know that freedom was an option, that happiness was an option. I want to be Tiffany for as many people as I can. I want to reach people who are feeling so lonely and so tired in the darkness. I want this book to be their light. I want them to pick up this book and read a passage and think, yes, I have had those exact same thoughts. Or yes, that happened to me too. Having that connection with someone else does wonders for a person who is feeling like no one in the world could possibly understand them. That's how I felt reading Unveiled by Ayaan Hirsi Ali. It healed me to know that another person was thinking and feeling those things too, and that I wasn't crazy. I was not possessed by a devil that was putting these thoughts into my head. I was not a black sheep, as my mother called me. I was sane, and I was good, and I do belong, but I belong over here, not over there. I want to reach people with my book, and I want them to know that they also belong. They belong here too. And that we will welcome them with open arms, and despite all the unending hate that will be thrown upon them, they will find peace and love and happiness, and most of all, freedom. And so, as a special treat for you tonight, I'm going to share with you one of my chapters. This chapter is called Betrayal. Petrified that I would be sent away to be married, I continued to swallow all my questions and doubts and continued to play the role of the dutiful Muslim daughter. For grade 8, I was enrolled in the local public junior high. I found myself, yet again, having to make new friends in a new school environment. To make matters even more difficult, I walked into my first year of high school with a rag on my head. This wasn't like the Muslim school where everyone wore it, where it didn't affect anyone's judgment of me. This was different. No one would see me for who I was. All they would see was that odd piece of cloth. It would identify me, it would define me, and I was enraged about it. That was not who I was. That was not the image that I wanted to project to the world. I was determined to take on the challenge of pushing myself to shine through. Despite the ugly cloth on my head, I made friends. I developed close relationships that filled me with happiness, and I appreciated my friendships even more because I recognized that they were overlooking that cloth in order to get to know me. They didn't let that cloth be a barrier as it was meant to be. My friends didn't let it define who I was. They got to know me, they accepted me, and they loved me for who I was. And a few of them are even here tonight. This was the exact opposite of what my mother thought would happen. I remember gleefully writing down the names of all my friends. Since I had come from such a small Muslim school to a huge public school, I was overwhelmed with how many friends I had. My mother asked me what I was doing, and when I told her, her face fell and then pinched itself into an angry frown. She snatched the paper from my hands and read through it with white-hot fury. But I was way ahead of her. There were no boys' names on that sheet. I wasn't stupid. But that wasn't her concern. She tore it up, enraged that I would be friends with so many non-believers. She had assumed that I would be a recluse. She figured that the students would want nothing to do with the weird kid with the thing on her head. She thought she was safe sending me to a school full of kuffar because they would ostracize me anyway. And then I would be cured. They would hate me and reject me, and then I would have no other choice but to hate them and reject them in return. My mom's initial reaction was to try and take me out of school immediately. She threatened it, but she didn't do it. Instead, she told me to enjoy my final year in school because I wouldn't return the following year. This petrified me. If I were taken out of school, my only connection to the real world, I would never know happiness again. I was desperate. I was overcome with a sadness and fear that didn't even lift when I was in school. Usually my personality shifted between home and school, between black and white, and now I was just gray all the time. My drama teacher, Mr. Fabro, asked me if I was okay. His question reached me like a beacon of light in a dark, deep well. I was more than happy to tell him everything. I didn't hold back. I met with him and I showed him the welts and bruises on my arms. In an Orwellian twist, later, the asshole that my mother had married stormed into my principal's office, angry that Mr. Fabro had seen my arm. The audacity of him. How dare this male teacher see the welts and bruises that he had inflicted on this child? The greater problem here, he surmised, was that a man I was not married to saw my arms, not that he himself had beaten me. As a teacher in a public school, it was Mr. Fabro's legal duty to notify the authorities when a minor was in physical danger. Both police and social workers questioned me, and I told them all of how my uncle would beat us mercilessly. I told them how he would walk in the door and without provocation grab me to release all his pent-up tensions of the day. He would pull off his belt and cover my body in welts. Mr. Fabro warned me that if I went along with this, there was a possibility that I might end up in a foster home, that I might never see my family again. He asked if I was prepared for that. I was giddy with excitement. I was as light as air with the possibility that I would never have to see those people again. I was just hoping that sounding this alarm would prevent me from being taken out of school. Am I okay with being taken out of that home, I thought? Are you kidding me? Nothing could possibly be more okay. He also warned me that I had to stay strong and that I had to be willing to stand up in court and say everything to the judge that I had said to him. I always remembered my promise to Mr. Fabro that I would stay strong. I envisioned myself courageously pointing him out in the courtroom as if I were in an episode of Matlock. I was prepared. The investigation grew from interviews with just me at the school to the police coming to the house and interviewing everyone else. My mother literally spat in my face and told me how much she hated me, but I stayed strong. I finally saw a bit of light glinting through the heavy layers of cement, and I was going to break free. A part of me was surprised that she wasn't being more supportive. She'd always acted like she had no control over him hitting us, like there was nothing she could do about it. Well, I was doing something about it. It was then that I fully realized that she was lying and that she was actually just being manipulative. Of course she knew what he was doing to us, but she pretended she had no idea and no control because she didn't want us to hate her. It was our hate that she earnestly deserved, but she was a coward. When she was questioned, she denied everything. She made me out to be a liar. My brother and my sister did the same. Munir's 2 children also lied. Out of the 5 children, I was the only one telling the truth. And with their lies, they were all condemning me to this life. They were too scared of the consequences. It dawned on me that there was a real possibility that I would never get out, and that I wouldn't be put in foster care, and that I would end up having to live there with them after I had just tried to have him arrested for child abuse. That was the scariest thought that had ever lived in my head. The judge ruled that corporal punishment wasn't against the law in Canada, and due to our culture, sometimes those punishments can be more severe than in the average Canadian household. The scariest thought crouching in the back of my mind became a reality with one swift smack of a judge's gavel. I never felt so betrayed in my life. It had been my only hope, and it had been dashed. How disgusting to allow a child to be beaten because her abuser happens to come from another country. What has that got to do with anything? All children should be protected. It doesn't hurt children any less physically, emotionally, or psychologically if they're from a different culture. Beatings and sexual abuse are equally damaging to all children, whatever culture they come from. If my abuser had been of German or Dutch descent, would he not be in prison? How does that make any sense? These laws are still in place in Canada. I cannot even imagine how many children have been ignored or thrown back into the lion's den like I was. In their effort to be culturally sensitive, my own country ended up being viciously bigoted towards me instead. I knew that if I had come from a family of white parents, I would have been protected. This is the typical result of regressive left thinking, when their minds are so open that their brains fall out. They only see skin color or ethnicity of the perpetrator, not the actual acts that they commit. If a white person refuses to bake a wedding cake for a gay couple, everyone will yell bigotry and assert that it is unacceptable. But when bakeries with Muslim owners refuse to bake cakes for a gay couple, the response is deafening silence. It's their culture, and we have to respect their beliefs, unless you're an Islamophobic bigot. There is no greater stupidity or double standard today. We need to look at the action, the incident, not the skin color or ethnicity or religion of the person performing the action. That is irrelevant. An immoral act is immoral regardless of who is doing it. We should all criticize bigotry, misogyny, child abuse, and other acts against humanity. Why do we care who is doing it? It's all equally wrong. It's the most heinous racism of low expectations if you do not hold all human beings to the same standards. This was the first time in my life I had tried to stand on my own. I was strong. I was determined to look Munir in the face in court, but I never got the chance. I had barely stood for a moment before my own country had cut me off at the knees, forcing me back down to the ground. It left me feeling like this is where I belonged, where I would stay forever. I was beyond devastated. I sincerely felt like it had been my only hope. I had nothing else to hope for, nothing else to live for. I would be severely punished for betraying my own and for going to the non-believers for help. It was the highest form of treason. I was always taught that it was us versus them, and I just went to them for help. It was unforgivable. Islam has a very strong notion of fate. Everything is preordained. Any effort to try and create your own destiny is meaningless. What Allah wants will eventually happen. Your whole life is written before you even take your first breath. This situation solidified those teachings for me. I wasn't in control or able to change my lot in life. I just had to accept that this is what Allah wanted, and there was no sense in continuing to fight. My mother took me out of school at the end of the year, as promised. It was all for nothing. I just accepted it. I was numb to the world around me. If you take away people's sense of free will, then you take away any motivation for them to keep fighting. What's the point? They will never set goals to try and achieve anything because if it's meant to happen, it will happen. So they just mindlessly move through life that unfolds in front of them, never hoping or bothering to try and change anything. Many years later, 30 years later, in fact, I reconnected with my teacher, Mr. Fabro. The moment I saw him, I burst into tears. He had no idea what had become of me. He assumed that I had been taken into a home. He could not believe that the court system had failed me. We spent the day in a restaurant where his son was the executive chef, talking about everything. He invited my husband and I back to his place where we met his wife. She remembered those days so long ago as well. It was all like a dream sequence. I was overwhelmed and overjoyed to have him back in my life. I spent the next day crying as all the memories that had bubbled to the surface upon seeing him rushed back to the forefront of my mind. I cried for that little girl. Before I left his house, Mr. Fabro said with conviction, "I would have taken you in." "Yes, we would have," his wife agreed. And my heart broke into a million pieces. How different my life would have been. My mom did not allow me to return to school the following year. By the time I returned, Mr. Fabro was gone. Our paths didn't cross again until I started writing this book. Unfortunately, Mr. Fabro could not be here tonight, but he has written the foreword for my book, which will be on sale out front, that you can pick up your copy right after the Q&A. Thank you.
So we are now going to start the Q&A. If anyone has any questions, you can either line up over there or over there and ask away.
So some people could see that things were going on with you. So Mr. Fabro asked a direct question. Did other people ask a direct question? Was there a sense of other people getting a hint? Was there a need once people saw a little bit to hold back and keep a double life going? Like.
Hello. Yes. So to answer your question, yes, absolutely. The only person that I shared all of this with in high school was Tiffany. I was too embarrassed. I was ashamed. I didn't want to talk about it, and I didn't want people to pity me, and I wanted to be happy at school. I was miserable enough at home, and when I went to school, I wanted it to just be a happy time. So I didn't really want to talk about it. But when Mr. Favreau asked me, I felt like it wouldn't just be a pity party, that he would actually be able to help me. And so that's why I shared with him.
Yasmine, let me first express my admiration for your personal story. I think you're the epitome of courage. My question to you is this.
Thank you.
Any public discourse on Islam that is critical of its failings is deemed as bigotry or Islamophobia. How do you respond to the unprincipled, philosophically relativistic left who dismiss people like you and Ayan Hirsi Ali as bigots or Islamophobes? Thank you.
Yeah, it's tiring. It is absolutely ridiculous. Not only, I feel like the double standard with speaking about Islam versus speaking about any other religion is just so nonsensical to me. And I feel like it comes from a place of people being scared of the bully. These guys killed the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists. These guys are ISIS. These guys have their trucks of peace. These guys are bombing kids in Ariana Grande concerts. Let's not say anything about them because we don't want them to kill us. That's not a good strategy. You know, like, since when has our response to bullies been, let's just do whatever they, like, does that work? If you have your child has a bully taking their lunch money every day, are you going to tell your kid, just give him your money every day and just do whatever he wants and never say anything bad about him? Like, that's not a good strategy. So it's very frustrating and it's very tiring, and I feel like it just derails the conversation instead of moving the conversation in a direction where we can actually start to solve issues and work on problems. Oh, hello.
Hi, thanks very much. That's very inspiring. I'm wondering how the free speech movement is doing on your campus. I don't know where that is, but have you had any good or bad experiences there?
I have had neither good nor bad experiences. I don't speak out on my campus like I do here. I try to continue to keep that life separate from this life.
No tenure yet?
I do have tenure.
Oh, good.
But actually what ended up happening was my dean was notified of my work, and his response was to call campus security and to make sure that I felt safe. So I'm very supportive. Thank you.
Yeah, now you teach something. Are you teaching psychology?
Yeah.
No? Okay. Well, does this experience bring you towards examining different schools of psychology as far as the mind fuck that was laid on you?
Yeah, when I was in university, I was very interested in psychology. That was actually the route that I would have taken had I been able to take any route I wanted. But I ended up going into education just because I was a single mom at the time and I was focused on getting a career once I graduated. So I made a practical decision instead.
Well, I hope to bring you to Seattle. I'm John Quill.
Oh, okay, great. I hope to go to Seattle. Thank you, John.
Hi, Yasmine. So my name is Omar Abdel Fattah. I'm the director of Ask a Muslim Canada. And as a practicing Muslim and somebody who speaks openly about Islam, I've given a TED Talk at UBC last year.
So did you have a question, Omar?
I do have a question, yes. So the question is very simple. I would ask you, would you be willing to debate me in front of everybody here? Not today, but we can organize a debate. Would you be willing to debate me about some of the things that you stated about Islam?
Yeah.
It's a very simple question.
So It's a very simple question, and the very simple response is no. I wouldn't debate you, I wouldn't debate a flat earther, I wouldn't debate an anti-vaxxer, I wouldn't debate somebody who believes in fairies and leprechauns.
Why not?
I'm not interested.
Speaking about being open-minded, however.
So this isn't a conversation, this is a question, answer, and now the next person in line.
Okay. My offer is still on the board.
Thank you.
So there might be some other people who might be willing to debate you, so I guess just keep trying. Inshallah. So I had a question about, you mentioned your organization, Free Hearts and Free Minds, and so you said that you help ex-Muslims or questioning Muslims in Muslim majority countries. Is that help just focused on helping them adjust to living life as an atheist in a Muslim country, or have you also collaborated with secular organizations such as Secular Rescue from Center for Inquiry to match them to some place in the Western world where they can live freely or apply for asylum or those resources?
That's actually exactly the group that I'm affiliated with. So when we do get contacted by people that are interested in fleeing the country that they're living in, then I connect them with Secular Rescue. But if they are in situations where they cannot flee for different reasons, then that's where we come in to just quite often support them in finding whatever avenue is best for them to find their own freedom. So whether that means financial freedom, whether that means divorcing the spouse that is Muslim, whether it means leaving the country, that's entirely up to the individual. After they go through the 6-week program, then they get to determine what's best for them. And if you go to our website and click on testimonials, then that's where the people that we've helped tell their stories of what it was like before they found Free Hearts, Free Minds, and after they've gone through the program.
So through this organization, do you provide a one-to-one service, or you have some other trained professionals who are helping these people?
Yeah, so actually the way Free Hearts, Free Minds came about was I was getting contacted by lots of ex-Muslims from around the world that were telling me their stories and asking me for support. And I, of course, wanted to help everybody as much as I could, and I empathized a lot with what they were going through. And it was completely consuming my life. And it got to the point that I had to take medical leave from work because it was just, I was having consistent panic attacks. It was just too much. And so I decided that I really wanted a professional to help these people. I didn't want to just be like, sorry, I can't do this. And so I found a professional, and his name is Jimmy Bangesh, and he is an ex-Muslim in the UK, and he was disowned by his family when they found out that he was gay. And so he's been through this, and his family is from Pakistan, and so Pakistan's one of the countries that executes people for leaving Islam, so he's very familiar with all of that. And so a lot of the people that go through the program really appreciate having Jimmy as their mentor because he's somebody who understands the world that they're coming from. And so that's why it's been a bit of a difficult process because not just any therapist will do, because like in my experience, therapists will say things like, why don't you just talk to your mother?
Or why don't you just leave?
Or why don't you just leave? Yeah. So it's helpful to have somebody who understands how impossible it is to do those things.
Thank you very much for answering my question.
Thank you.
Hi there, Yasmine. Thanks for coming. I'd basically like to discuss this topic with people and take your position. And invariably from people from the left, you'll get something like, America deserved it, it's America's fault. So what credence do you give to perhaps people in the Middle East or other parts who really feel that there's geopolitical interference from the West in the business of, countries that are predominantly Islam religiously. How much of the is there a justification for that type of attitude toward the West, and how much of this comes from an inherent fault in the religion itself?
I think it's a bit of both. I don't think that it's entirely one side or the other. But I also, speaking about people in Muslim majority countries, I want to express that there are a lot of people in those countries that are trying really hard to have the freedoms that we have in the West. Just today, I saw a photograph of a woman walking in Saudi Arabia with no hijab on and no abaya. She's just wearing pants and a shirt and walking in the mall. And that is, she could get arrested for that. So to do something so simple like that is such an act of defiance. She's a warrior to do that. And she looks to the feminists here in the West, and she says, that's what I want. I want that kind of freedom. I want equality too. And so for us here in the West, I think that if we do have any kind of responsibility at all, it would be to uphold our own values and to be proud of our own values. And when we see other people trying to attain enlightenment in the same way that we have, that we should try and facilitate that process and support them instead of doing the opposite, like selling hijabs in Marks and Spencer or in Banana Republic. And that kind of thing is really damaging to the motivation of women, like women in Iran that are being imprisoned for 10 years because they took a hijab off, and then we're splashing it on runways over here. So there is quite a disconnect between the two cultures, and I think that with me having one foot in that culture and one foot in this culture, I'm hoping that I can help to bridge that miscommunication.
Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you so much for doing what you do. I'm going to school to become a social worker, and I feel like a bit of a black sheep in there, which is fine.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what advice would you give to the next generation of social workers?
It's interesting. My daughter is going to school to be a social worker as well. And she came home and she said, Mom, we went around the room and everybody said their name and their pronouns. So she feels like a black sheep there too because, she has to bite her tongue a lot. And one of the things she had to do was in her final exam, there was a true or false question. Gender is a social construct. And so she had to answer it incorrectly, otherwise she would get it wrong. So I understand your plight. I don't know what advice I could specifically give you about the program that you're in right now, other than I'm glad you're in it. And I'm glad there are people like you that are hopefully going to be willing to have discussions and conversations and open minds of your classmates. Perhaps you'd be willing to just, ask a provocative question every now and then. And I think you might find that there are other people in the class that are agreeing with you, but maybe they just didn't want to be the first person to voice their opinion. So I guess that's what I would say. I'd say be brave, keep going, and I'm glad you're there.
Hi, Yasmine. First of all, sorry that you got abused by your husband, and I hope you get over your trauma. Second, I have 3 questions. Is that okay? 3 is too much?
Well, we'll just do one and one, just to be fair.
Okay, so I'll do one, then one, then one? Or yeah. My first question is, you got bullied by your husband. Do you think when you criticize that person, isn't it bullying? That's my first question. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
When you are trying to criticize him and you criticize the other person when he came ask you a question, do you think is that a form of bullying or no?
She did not criticize you. And if you don't like it, you can leave.
asinine question. That's a truly asinine question. It's foolish. Move on to the next question. What's the next one?
The next question.
Yeah, can she answer it?
The next question. Is your main message to encourage people to be Islamophobic and hate 1.7 million Muslims around the world? And the next question. You said
Actually,
no?
if you had been listening to my speech, I clarified exactly why I'm doing this. So I specifically already gave you the 3 reasons why I speak out. You should have been paying attention.
The problem is not the drug addicts. So tell me one phrase in Quran that says hit woman, because the 3 phrases in Quran.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
The 3 phrases in Quran. I could read it on you.
The specific ayah in the Quran is 434, Surah An-Nisa, the 4th chapter, where Allah instructs men, if you fear arrogance or disobedience from your wife, then you should, first of all, admonish her. And if she doesn't listen, then don't share the bed with her. And if she still doesn't listen, beat her. There's the ayah for you. All right, next question, please.
I have a somewhat more practical question. First, great talk. My name is Brian Pitcock. I'm actually a local, was born here. I have a certain amount of fear about what I see happening. So my question is, based on your background and experience, if by some miracle a secret ballot was held today and everybody in Canada that identifies as a Muslim was allowed to vote, and it was a secret ballot, what percentage would vote in favor of Sharia?
Well, that's a tricky question. There is actually Pew Research to give you the correct answers to that. The Pew Research, however, was done in Muslim-majority countries, and the answers are incredibly frightening. They're overwhelmingly in the 80 and 90%. I don't know what the percentages would be here in the West, but there is a curious thing that happens, which is a lot of people flee from Sharia countries to come to the free West, and then once they're here, they start asking for Sharia. So that's in the UK, for example, there are over 60 Sharia law courts. Luckily, we don't have any in Canada, but there have been requests for it. There have been groups that have tried to say, we want Sharia courts so that we can pass judgments on our own community. And of course, I don't think that should be allowed at all, and I'm completely against it.
Yes, thank you. And I completely understand your point. There are millions and millions of very good Muslims in the world, but the ideology behind them is frightening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Islamophobia does not exist by definition. Anybody that knows anything about Islamic scripture and is not a believer has very good reason to be afraid.
That's right. It's not an irrational fear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've heard you talk several times, and I'm on your Fadden Club and look at your sites. My question is, I'm a humanist chaplain at one of our universities here, and I'm the only humanist chaplain in Western Canada. And so I attract students from various religious backgrounds who are in conflict with their families, usually because they're secularizing or they're being traumatized by the religious indoctrination or whatever that's going on. And it's a very awkward situation for me because I'm not hired by the university, but I want to give them advice. And I was a psychologist for 40 years, so it's different when you approach them as a psychologist and you're a client as opposed to being a chaplain. I'm supposed to be kind of non-directive and, my question to you is, in your experience of dealing with apostasy and dealing with kids who are secularizing in strong homes, sometimes the child, the progeny, whoever it is, university student, whatever, can actually have an effect on the family in a positive way, such as I've had LGBT gay students who have actually opened the minds of the family because of their gayness.
Yeah.
And they actually, because they love them,
Yeah.
change.
Yes.
In your relationship with your mother,
Mhm.
was there anything you ever did in any way that, because she had some connection with you, even if it's primate, that you changed her in any way positively, or was it always moving more toward manipulation? I need to know that if it's a hopeless cause when I deal with my Muslim apostate kids, or is there some hope?
So my situation was a hopeless cause, but I have spoken to many ex-Muslim kids who have told me that once they've spoken to their parents are unhappy about it and they're sad about it, but they don't hate them. They don't want to kill
brutalize
them.
them or kick them out.
No, no.
Okay,
So in my experience, that was my experience. That was the experience of Jimmy. That's the experience of many ex-Muslims. But it really depends on the parents and
Is
how.
there a key that I can ask about and they can explore that might let them know the risk?
The student themselves, when they speak with you, they'll know.
Yeah.
They'll know if their parents will be willing to hear it, or if
Their
they would be
intuition is
risking their
something.
lives. Yes.
Okay, go for their judgment then.
Yeah, and they should, like, if they're feeling like they shouldn't tell their parents and that they don't want to, then we shouldn't encourage them to, because they know best. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Hi, yeah, came on my radar when the Rahaf incident happened. I'm really grateful for your leadership in feminism worldwide. Just a quick question, if you're Prime Minister of Canada, what law or what would you do to really help the cause of feminism worldwide?
So what I would do is I would, when we talk about bringing in immigrants into Canada, we take some shortcuts and we say like, oh, we're going to bring people from this country, or we're going to bring people from this religion, or something like that. But what I would do instead is I would say we're going to bring in people with values that match Canadian values. So you'd actually have to find out if these people really do believe in equality of women and men, or equality of LGBT, or free speech, or all of the things that we hold dear and are important to us. I think that would be one of the major things that I would do.
Thank you so much for being here. Do you think there is hope in Islam?
I think that that I have hope in Muslims, but I do not have hope in Islam, and I'll explain. I think that there are a lot of Muslims out there right now that are willing to identify as Muslim, but are not willing to follow their religion verbatim. That they say, nope, this is hateful, I'm not going to do this, no, I disagree with this, and they basically cherry pick what parts of the religion they want to follow. They value humanism and liberalism and democracy, and they are against Sharia, and they are against, so many of the issues with Islam. And so I would 100% support those individuals. But as far as the religion of Islam itself, there's nothing there that I support. Yeah.
I want to start by saying I really acknowledge you for the work that you do and the courage that must take to stand up and do that. And my question is something that I was kind of curious about as I saw the exchange that you had with the two Muslim men here. I sense quite a bit of, I think, hostility from you towards them. And I'm wondering, one, why that is, and two, if you think that that impacts the ability to have a conversation about something that's very sensitive.
Well, those gentlemen I'm already aware of because they're very prominent on my Facebook page. So, hence the animosity. It wasn't just meeting them for the very first time.
Thank you.
Hi, Yasmine. Thanks for speaking up, and that's very good to hear your story. Essentially, you're looking at maybe a male version of yourself. I'm an ex-Muslim, and also I was abused and all that stuff. And the problem was that I was born raised in Iran, and in Iran, my parents went to divorce,
And then when you go to a divorce, if you're a boy, until the age of 15, the father gets full custody. And then if you're abused by your father, there's no way to fix it. My mom would hide behind the school to come see us, and she was noticing that we were upset, and she would take us to the court to tell the judge that my kids are upset, and I'm a mom and I know my kids are upset. The judge look at us and says, boys to their father. And they asked us if we wanted to speak up and say we were abused, and then we talked 2-3 times and it just got worse. What happened to us is, well, we felt if we open up, it's only going to get worse. So we started having 2 personalities, trying to be happy so no one would notice we were upset. The thing is, if I want to solve the situation, I think in Canada we probably have a lot of people like me who have been abused. I didn't speak up for maybe 12 years since I'm in Canada because I thought I just didn't feel safe, and I didn't have Canadian citizenship. So I thought, what if I speak up? What if it just, you know, when you grow up in that fearful atmosphere, it's nothing like Canada. I don't think anyone here would experience that feeling that you and I maybe went through. And I'm half Arabic, from Arabic part of Iran. So there are 2 things we need to do in Canada if I want to get past over my past. We need to screen the people who come in, especially young men, because or young women also, to just say you can speak up, it's okay, you're safe, just them feeling safe. And the second thing is, what we go through is so brutal that public here doesn't understand. I don't know if you agree with me, but if I talk to a normal person about what happened to me, honestly, I think it's traumatizing. They would easily puke on the floor. And I don't think we have therapists who would understand what we say. It's just so local to Islam and what we grew up in that I can't just go. I tried going to a therapist who was born in South Africa, or a therapist who was, I thought I would go share with a woman. She would somehow understand, but it's just so much that we can't say. I think that therapy and also feeling people that you're safe, speak up, it's okay, so that we get them on track is something we need to do in Canada. Thank you very much. The only reason I share is because I care about people, and I agree with you. I have hope in people, Muslims. I was a Muslim, my cousins are Muslim. I know we are not bad people. It's just the institutionalized religion that is put in the government, is put in the court, it's put in the justice system, that is trying to suppress people and just make the hell out of the life of them. So,
but the people of Iran are fighting back, so they're pretty amazing. Inshallah.
So thank you for being here. And I have a only tiny question. Have you ever tried to understand Quran from a different point of view, different from your parents, by studying and searching the history and the language? And if you have, how was the experience?
Yeah, that was my initial experience. So in the history of religions course that I was taking, we were looking at Islam from a critical lens, as we did the Bible. Second, we looked at the First Testament, and we also looked at the New Testament. So that's exactly what I was doing. And there were a lot of parts in the Quran that I didn't even know about, that had not been shared with me. Some of the scientific things that were very not scientific at all, those were just kept from me because, you know, even as a child, I would not believe that. I would be surprised. Or even things like the hadith, where Prophet Muhammad says that you should drink camel urine because it will cure all the ailments. I didn't know about that when I was a Muslim. It wasn't until afterwards, when I started looking into it, that I found all of these things where I was just like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe that all of this was in here. And I think that that's probably the case for most Muslims. I think most Muslims just sort of believe what their parents tell them, or, you know, and don't necessarily look at the book themselves. And I think that if they did, a lot of them would probably run.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Hi, I had a question about, I'm sure you receive very frequent criticism from a variety of angles, and I was just wondering how you would address some of it, because I would imagine one of the frequent ones is like, well, this was your experience in your family, but not all families are like this, and I would imagine the other common one is, this is your experience as in a particular sect or philosophy of Islam, but it's not the universally practiced one in every set. And so how you respond to that criticism, and whether or not there's potential for reformation to get a better interpretation or a more modern secular kind of aspect of that, if there's hope for that. Thank you.
Yeah, so the first question was, this happened to you, but it didn't necessarily happen to other people. So yes, that is something that I commonly get. There are obviously things, I say, it is my life is unique, it's my unique story, but my story is not unique. There is a reason why there are so many ex-Muslims coming out and posting videos, #AwesomeWithoutAllah, and things like that. There's a reason why we're all connecting. And we're all connecting over these themes, over these things that we all have in common. Whether you're from Somalia, or whether you're from Indonesia, or whether you're from Saudi Arabia, or whether you're from Canada or France, we all have this shared experience. And the reason why we have this shared experience is because it all comes from the same book. So yes, this is what happened to me. I was forced into a marriage, but I'm certainly not the only woman that was forced into a marriage. I was taken to Egypt and dropped off there because my parents or my mother couldn't handle me anymore. I'm not the only girl that happened to. I have so many people telling me that they relate so much to my story because all of the things that have happened to me are all related. In fact, my mom used to point out the scripture to prove to me, like when she'd say to me, you are not allowed to have non-Muslim friends. You cannot take non-Muslims as your friends because they are evil, and if you are friends with them, then you will be considered evil too. See, here it says so right there in the Quran. And so my mother was a student of Al-Azhar University. I don't know if you know that university, but it's a very prestigious Sunni Islamic university in Egypt. And she knew her stuff. She wasn't a fundamentalist growing up. She's what I call a born-again Muslim. So she just went in head first, and she really knew her stuff, and I was raised by her. And your second question, I can't remember.
The various sects or interpretation
yes,
of
absolutely.
Islam, yeah.
So yeah, that's very true, but 90% of Muslims are Sunni, and that's what I was. So my experience is probably the most common. And I was a conservative or even a fundamentalist or even an extremist Muslim, the family that I grew up in. So if you, again, this is all, there's data to support the fact that most Muslims are conservatives. Now, not all of them are extremists, of course, out of the conservatives, but there is a fair number, and that's why we have things like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, or the gentleman that was here talking about Iran earlier. That's why you end up with Sharia governments and the Islamic Republic of Iran. That's how that happens, is because people want that, and they ask for it, and then, of course, the ones that don't want it are silenced by either being put in prison or killed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello. I wanted to ask you about, for many young Muslims, like myself, where we're starting to question our beliefs and we're starting to learn more and more about our religion, sometimes it can be hard to accept that loss of purpose, because I know that for me as a young child, Islam was like my life. It was everything, every day, praying and fasting and these kind of things, and I took pride in it, and I felt happy because my parents approved of it and things like that. So I'm wondering, what advice can you give to younger Muslims who are seeking something more from their lives in terms of finding their purpose and transitioning into a more open life that isn't just Islam and Islam only?
Yeah, that was actually a very, very difficult transition. It's really, really scary. Islam, they say it's the Sirat al-Mustaqim, which means it's like, think of it like a tight wire, and hell is underneath you. So you have to follow this very straight, very narrow path, and it really does consume every single aspect of your life. And so when you're born and raised in that, and then when you say, I don't want to walk on this path anymore, it is debilitatingly, like, it's so scary because you don't know what to do. I felt like I was in the middle of a vast ocean, and I didn't know what to do and where to go. And that's because I was always being told what to do and where to go. And now I had the opportunity to figure that out for myself. And so in the beginning, it was really scary. But then once you get into it, once you start to realize, like, I can actually do what makes me happy. I can actually do what I want. And then you start to really build yourself up brick by brick. That's essentially, Majid Nawaz, who is a Muslim reformer who wrote a great book called Radical, where he talks about his life. He talked about having to do that, and he's a Muslim. He's not an ex-Muslim. But he has to do that same process of saying, I am not this person anymore, because he used to be an extremist. He was actually imprisoned in Egypt. I'm not this person anymore, so who am I? And then you just have to go through this excruciatingly slow process of step-by-step building the new you. It's fun, though.
Thank you very much, and I hope many people can build better lives out of themselves.
Thank you.
Hi, so every time there's another incident in a Western country with, say, a truck of peace, I keep thinking, surely this will be the one that flips the masses from the predominant narrative of academia and the leftist media. And it seems to never come to fruition, so I was wondering, do you think there is a threshold where it crosses over?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and Asra Nomani, who again is a Muslim reformer, was on the Bill Maher show after what happened in Paris in 2015, and she said that her mother had said, things will only change when there are rivers of blood, then people will finally wake up. And so she said on the show that day, I think these are the rivers of blood. I think that people will finally wake up after this. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. I don't know what it's going to take. It's unfortunate that the conversation always revolves around, like, does there need to be another 9/11? Like, it's unfortunate that that's what has to happen to wake people up. I hope that we can somehow have the conversations that we need to have without people needing to die for us to have those conversations.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hi, Yasmine. I just want to start by saying thank you for being so vulnerable with us and for sharing your burden. So in the age of Trump and with the rise of white supremacy and white supremacist violence, do you have any advice for how we can properly support ex-Muslims and while also supporting Muslims as human beings without empowering the white supremacist terrorists in the process?
Yeah, I think that is a question that comes up a lot. I think that's always a concern. In fact, when we, many years ago, I think it was 2016, we came out with a hashtag ex-Muslim because, and that came out of the UK. And that was the first time that ex-Muslims ever spoke out and found each other online. And when that happened, like, the overwhelming response was, how could you do this? You're gonna now cause, white supremacists to hate on Muslims, and this is your fault, and you're doing this, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, we're trying to have our community, we're trying to solve our problems, we're trying to heal each other, and that's our goal. And if there are other people that are going to hijack that or that are going to, misinterpret that, we can't control that. But at the same time, we can't keep silent because there might be somebody out there who will misconstrue what we're saying. We just can't do that. You know, we have to be there for each other, and we're just going to continue supporting each other, and we just have to be very clear about, you know, what we're feeling. And most Muslims are brown. You know, like you're not going to find any ex-Muslims that are going to be supportive of white supremacists. You're not going to find any white supremacists that are supportive of any ex-Muslims. We're like, you know, diametrically opposed. It's just like people that like to blame, you know, Zionists for supporting Nazis. It's incredibly stupid. It's incredibly insulting, and I don't really understand where they're getting this from, because we've never, as ex-Muslims, we've never had the support of white supremacists, and we certainly do not support them.
Yes, so do you have any advice for well-meaning white liberals who are total outsiders to this, for how to support ex-Muslims in all this?
I think that we should just speak the truth and just be honest all the time. And when you're speaking about why you're supporting ex-Muslims, you're speaking, you know, from a place of truth. You support them because you believe in freedom of thought, and you believe in humanism, and you believe, you know, whatever the reason is. And none of those reasons, you know, again, same thing. If somebody wants to hijack what you're doing, you can't be in control of that. You can just, I would really not want you to silence your support of ex-Muslims because you're afraid that that's going to cause other people to feel emboldened. You know, I want you to continue to support ex-Muslims.
Hi. I just have a question. In Canada, we do have a lot of second and third generation Canadian Muslims. So, of course, we do have some parents who are refugees or from these countries that we were talking about, and I was just wondering how we can get resources, outreach, educators, law enforcement to help, you know, the black sheep who do fall, you know, unfortunate things such as FGM and forced arranged marriages, radicalization. In Somali, we have Dakan Edis, which means return to culture. So how can we protect Canadians from being sent back to the motherland for these type of things?
That's a really good question. I think that it depends on, you know, the government of the day and how they are going to respond to these issues. Under the Harper government, we used to have a hotline where people would call in if they suspected issues like FGM or a girl going to be sent back home for, you know, to get married or to be straightened out or any of those issues. And with the current government, they didn't even want to say that FGM is barbaric. That was considered a bad word. So, you know, I think that what we're doing instead is there's a lot of grassroots movements out there, so we're just doing it for ourselves. So there is an FGM Canada group that is working hard, and, you know, we're small but mighty. I'm part of that group. And there are other groups that protect girls that are at risk of, you know, child marriage and things like that. So we just have like small grassroots groups going on, and hopefully, you know, we just have to try and reach those kids. That's the problem, is the communication. But luckily with the internet and Twitter and Facebook and stuff, people can go on there and hopefully find the support that they need.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, Yasmine. You are an inspiration. You are so brave. What an incredible woman. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. I have it's slightly light-hearted, but the publishing companies, including Twiggy's and Downton Abbey's, did they give you any reasons as to why?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my publisher shows, or my literary agent is from the UK. And that's where the Salman Rushdie thing happened. So they're gun shy over there. They're nervous. I had quite a few people tell me, like, had your agent been in the U.S., probably things would have been different. But in the UK, I did get a lot of responses of we just don't have the finances to cover the security that would be required to take on this book. You know, I had a lot of that kind of response. And there were other responses along the lines of, we already have Ayaan Hirsi Ali's book, so we already have the story of an ex-Muslim woman, so we don't really need another one. So that one to me is very upsetting, because we would never say, oh, we already have the story of one black man, so we're done. We already have the story of one cowboy, you know what I mean? Like, we have many, many stories on the same topic quite often. So those are the two major reasons why.
Okay, but you self-published, so great.
I did, thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Hello. First, I want to just say thank you for the inspiration and the leadership. And I also want to say thank you for signaling for me when I was in trouble and helping me settle in Canada as a UN refugee. So just to give some context, it's my 17th year as a human rights activist and a political activist. I'm a UN resettled refugee in Canada. So 2 years into my refugee, I have a date thing going on, so it's Muju to AR, after refugee. I'm currently, it's not more of a question, but rather some things that I'm testing and experimenting with right now that I thought I'd run by and get some feedback. And maybe hopefully other people will hear that feedback. So I completely dismiss Islamic arguments at this point because I'm so tired of, explaining positions and so forth. But the Maldives itself is a 100% Islamic country. They really love that label, and it's constitutionally sort of mandated that it is that. The fact that I exist completely throws that narrative out of the ballpark, and I've enabled other people to also come out over the last few years, and that label is completely in question. So it's every time a discussion or political thing is brought up, believers, right? So let's not call them Muslims or whatever. Believers of Islamic theology would bring up Islamic arguments, and some of them has no relevance to reality, like the sciences have debunked a lot of this stuff. So I completely just dismiss it, and that come across as offensive, but I also understand that mocking and offensive material is a useful tool, and I deploy it almost always, and it's resulted in raising the bar, so to speak, of what is offensive. And by raising the bar, what I've noticed is the moderates have continuously lifted the baseline, and so it's changed society over the years. And now in the Maldives, we're seeing an accelerated process of that. And I guess it's social engineering to some level, and I've been reading up on this quite a bit. And so I guess I wanted your thoughts on what you think social engineering as a tool could be in terms of addressing the problems that Islam's created, and how do we solve, using that as solving. And I also wanted to know what your thoughts is on, literally mockery of Islamic beliefs.
Yeah.
Because how do you respond to a belief system that continuously calls to kill you, or murder you, or attack you, or dehumanizes you, And even with the people that is sort of moderate or nice, they would just go like, I pray you don't go to hell. Or even sometimes they'll go like, well, I hope you rot in hell. I don't believe in the hell. I think it's nonsense.
Hey man, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you please get to the point? Yeah. I know I appreciate your story. Could you? Yeah. What's your question? Yeah. Get to the question.
So I guess the question is,
yeah.
What's your thoughts on like social engineering as a viable tool to combat problems of Islam, and maybe one day get rid of Islam completely?
So I think there are a lot of people that are going down that route. We saw that especially during the Pride Parade when a lot of ex-Muslims had like signs that said Allah is gay and Muhammad split my moon. People that are burning Qur'ans, people that are like defecating on Qur'ans, people that are doing all sorts of things like that. And I say all the power to them, that's great, but that's not where I personally put my energy. My energy is, like, I'm more focused on the individuals who are in situations where they are completely surrounded by Islam and they just want to break free, because those are the people that I relate to the most. So I feel like, you know, Islam will take care of itself. I mean, nobody is praying to Zeus, right? Like, it's over. It will go over time. I may not live to see it, but I didn't think I was going to live to see Saudi Arabian women taking off their niqabs and burning them either. I didn't think that I was going to live to see a lot of the things that I'm seeing coming from the Muslim world these days. So, yeah, you know, I think that it will eventually be eradicated, and that's, you know, if that's the way that you want to go about it, with helping that process, then all power to you. I support you, but that's just not where. That's just not what I prefer to do. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Muju.
We had Sarah Hader down in Seattle, and she covered a lot of the same ground. Was that you got a bunch of clueless liberals over here, they're just idiots, and even though you agree with them on everything else, when it comes to Islam, it's just, you know, ridiculous. And so what is the solution to this? And she was saying numbers. We need more ex-Muslims. And as anybody, all I can say in my own case is that if there were enough of them and they joined mainstream politics, like my 43rd District Democrats in Seattle, if there was just one other intelligent person in there on this subject besides me, it would make a big difference, you know. And so I'm just suggesting this, and do you know of any of it going on in Canada?
Well, I'm sure there are ex-Muslims with political aspirations out there. I mean, I hope that they succeed. I know that there are quite a few Muslims out there. And it would be nice to have, you know, ex-Muslims out there as well, countering a lot of these narratives and a lot of, you know, basically lies that are being told. Just to have ex-Muslims there to be like, no, actually that's not true. So that would be nice, but yeah, I don't know. It's hopefully over time that might happen, but I think right now that they're just, ex-Muslims are really just concerned about their own personal safety. Even when you're living in Canada, as you know, like, oh, you may not know, you're from the States, but we've had honor killings here. A 16-year-old girl in Ontario was killed by her parents, by her brother and her father, because she wouldn't wear hijab. There were Shafia sisters, 4 sisters that were killed by their father. You know, so, and it's not unheard of in the States either. There was 2 girls in Texas that were killed by their father. So I think that it would be really difficult for an ex-Muslim to be that public, like to be campaigning and to be in that political sphere right now. I think that it would take a bit more time before they felt safe enough to do that. Thank you.
Hi,
Good evening. So my question is like, what is your opinion on people who voluntarily or due to indoctrinations leave their home countries to join as ISIS fighters, and later on they decide they want to return to their countries? Just so for just context, I come from Indonesia, but I'm not a Muslim myself, and I've read from like local news some time ago about supposedly many cities, I don't know how many, like they already cut their passports, and like ISIS losing wars, and like they wanted to return to their back to Indonesia, and like I just want your opinion on that.
Yeah, I'm adamantly against that. So I went on a few, when in the UK and in the US, there were a few ISIS brides that wanted to come back home because they were like, you know, because ISIS is gone now, as far, like they're not getting the support that they had, their husbands are dead, and they want to raise their children in, of course, a clean, free society where they can have proper education, et cetera, et cetera. But like you said, these are people that have ripped up their passports, that have burned them, that have voluntarily gone to join a terrorist organization, and I think that they can just stay where they are.
That concludes the Q&A. Before I get to my closing remarks, there's something I wanted to mention. It wasn't easy to host this. We got a lot of threats, we got a lot of weird emails. There's actually a girl who is an ex-Muslim who wanted to come tonight, and she had messaged us saying, you know, I'm really worried, I bought a ticket, but I'm really scared to come. And that really bugged me, that is the case in Canada in the first world. She did come, she is here tonight, I'm not going to point her out, but I just thought, I love that bravery, but it's sad that is bravery. And so I do want to commend everyone for coming tonight, but I hope we can get to a point where I don't have to commend you for being brave to come to a free speech event. Yasmine is going to be signing books out front. They are for sale. For those of you who purchased our VIP package, it's on us. You'll be getting that for free. Everyone else has to pay. But, you know, I just wanted to thank you all for coming out again, and let's give it up for Yasmine Mohammed.
I'm Yasmine Mohammed. Please subscribe to the awesome Free Speech Club, unless you're an Islamophobic bigot.